Chapter 2. Gangland. Crime rose in America in the 1920s and 1930s for two major reasons: the Great Depression and Prohibition. The Great Depression lasted from 1929 to 1939. It was the worst economic crisis in American history. Many of the country's banks failed. Millions lost their jobs, their homes, and their savings. In 1933, the worst year of the Depression, 1 out of every 4 American workers didn't have a job. Sometimes when people became desperate for money, they turned to crime. Prohibition also led to more crime. It made selling, making, and shipping alcoholic beverages illegal in America. Prohibition was the law of the land from 1920 to 1933, but many Americans still bought liquor illegally. Gangs of organized criminals, known as the mob, controlled much of the buying and selling of illegal alcohol. The mob had been around in America since the late 1800s. It was an organized crime ring that operated in big cities across the country. One of the most successful mobsters of the day, who would later become Alcatraz's most famous inmate, was a man named Al Scarface Capone. Alphonse Capone was born in Brooklyn, New York on January 17, 1899. He was one of 9 children. His parents had left southern Italy for America just 5 years earlier. The family lived in an apartment down the street from Al's father's barber shop. Al was a smart boy, but downtown Brooklyn was an easy place to find trouble. It didn't take Al long to fall in with the wrong crowd. At 14, he dropped out of school and joined a gang of tough street kids. Around this time, Al met an older man named Johnny Torrio. Johnny was an important New York City crime boss. He took Al under his wing. Johnny showed Al that it was important to lead a quiet life at home, even if he made money through crime. For a while, though, Al held down legal jobs. He worked at bookbinding factories and a bowling alley. After Al got married in 1918, he worked as an accountant, handling money for a construction company. People in the neighborhood knew Al Capone to be a good man and a leader. Then, Johnny Torrio introduced Al to Frankie Yale. He was a gangster who owned a bar in Brooklyn. Al soon joined Frankie's gang. Frankie was a different kind of teacher. Unlike Johnny, Frankie Yale taught Al about using violence to get what you wanted. When Al got into a fight at Frankie's bar one night, his left cheek was slashed with a knife or razor blade. That's what gave him his nickname, Scarface. Meanwhile, Johnny Torrio moved to Chicago. When Prohibition became law in 1920, he started bringing liquor in from Canada and selling it in the States. This was called bootlegging. Soon, Johnny invited Al to move to Chicago and help him run things, and Al said yes. By the mid-1920s, the liquor was flowing freely in the Windy City. More than 1,000 gangs ruled Chicago's streets. It was a violent and bloody time. After someone tried to kill Johnny Torrio, he decided to move to Italy for a while. That left Al to run the business. Money poured into his pockets. By 1929, Al Capone was bringing in more than $60 million annually. That's worth more than $830 million today. Al made friends with cops and city hall politicians, then paid them money not to arrest him. Bootleggers competing with Al were either paid to give up their businesses or killed. In Chicago, people who liked their liquor loved Al Capone. One man who didn't love Al Capone was George Bugs Moran. Bugs was a rival gang member. He wanted a piece of Al's business, and he had tried to kill Al and Johnny Torrio before. It is believed that Al Capone ordered Jack McGurn, one of his hitmen, to kill Bugs. Jack cooked up a nasty scheme. On Valentine's Day 1929, Jack lured Bugs Moran's gang to a garage to buy some cheap liquor. Jack and his men showed up at the garage dressed as cops. They told Bugs's gang to face the wall. Bugs's gang thought they were under arrest, but when they turned around, Capone's men took out their machine guns and opened fire, killing all 7 men. This bloody event came to be known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Bugs Moran survived. He had never gone inside the garage. Al was more than 1,000 miles away at his home in Miami Beach, Florida. That was the plan. Now he couldn't be accused of killing anyone. But the St. Valentine's Day Massacre turned the public against Capone. He was named Public Enemy Number 1 by the Chicago Crime Commission, a group of concerned citizens who thought he was the worst gangster in Chicago. It took until 1931, but Al Capone was finally charged with a crime: failing to pay his taxes. He was found guilty and sentenced to 11 years in prison. Al Capone served 2 years at the federal prison in Atlanta, Georgia. Federal prisons are for criminals who have committed a federal crime. Federal crimes are ones that break laws passed by the federal government, rather than the laws passed by the states. These crimes include airplane hijacking, bank robbery, and tax evasion. Capone led a comfortable life in his Atlanta prison cell. He had a nice desk, a comfortable armchair, special bed sheets, and a rug. He hid cash in his cell, which he used to bribe prison guards. Sometimes, Al and the guards listened to the radio together. Al's family and friends moved to a nearby hotel so he could have visitors every day. But on August 18, 1934, Al Capone was removed from his cell. He was handcuffed, shackled, and put on a train with 52 other inmates. For days, the train chugged across the country. Al Capone was on his way to Alcatraz. Finally, the train reached San Francisco. Normally, a boat would have taken prisoners across the bay to the Rock. But the warden, the man in charge of Alcatraz, wasn't taking any chances that Capone would try to escape from the train. So what did he do? He had the entire train car loaded onto a barge, which was towed across the choppy waters to the island prison. The warden's mansion. The warden lived in a 3-story, 17-room mansion on Alcatraz. The house offered beautiful views of San Francisco, and after it opened in 1937, the famous Golden Gate Bridge. The mansion also featured lush gardens and a greenhouse, which were cared for by an inmate. Most of the mansion burned in 1970, but its remains can still be seen today. Besides the warden's mansion and the cell house on Alcatraz, there were other buildings. The Model Industries Building, and later the New Industries Building, was where inmates went to work to build things. Alcatraz even had its own power plant to generate electricity. Alcatraz had been a federal prison for less than a year. Now it became home to the most famous gangster in the country. Al Capone, Public Enemy Number 1, was now known simply as Number 85 AZ, Alcatraz's 85th civilian prisoner. Warden James A. Johnston made the rules here, and according to the warden, Alcatraz was minimum privilege, maximum security. Here on the Rock, there would be no talking, 1 visitor per month, and absolutely no bribery. Al once said, "It looks like Alcatraz has got me licked." Other famous Alcatraz inmates. George Machine Gun Kelly was nicknamed for his favorite weapon, the Thompson submachine gun. His first was a gift from his wife. A bank robber, bootlegger, and kidnapper, he was caught in 1933 after kidnapping a wealthy oilman. Alvin "Creepy" Karpis was called creepy because of his evil-looking grin. He teamed up with brothers Fred and Doc Barker and their mother Ma Barker to form a gang that became famous for deadly bank robberies. Creepy Karpis was captured and served longer than any other man at Alcatraz, almost 26 years. Robert Stroud, known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, raised and studied hundreds of birds while imprisoned in Kansas. He even published a book called The Diseases of Canaries in 1933. He was moved to Alcatraz in 1942, but he had to leave his birds behind.